anymore.
It's
He's
always been
trying
like
to
this since
control
the
me
divorce,
again, and
okay?
I'm not doing this.
Okay.
He told me he was going to ruin my life. He literally said he would destroy me.
All right.
I know my rights. You can't just show up and take his side. You can't
We're just
touch
here
me.
to figure out what happened today. Him calling you on me is insane.
The bodycam footage starts with a shaky view of a sunny street. Tinsley stands in front of a big, expensive house, and she looks very upset. As soon as the officers walk up, she does not wait for them to speak. She starts waving her hands and raising her voice. It has always been like this, she yells, her face turning red. She quickly tells the officers that she and her husband, Silas, are already divorced. Even though they are divorced, she claims he is obsessed and trying to force her back into a relationship she does not want. Then, she makes a very serious claim. She stares right at the lead officer and says that Silas looked at her and threatened to kill her. When the officer tries to ask her to stay calm, she gets even louder. "I know my rights," she snaps, stepping closer to the camera. She tells the police that they are not allowed to touch her and that it is not normal for them to be at her house investigating her just because her husband called them. She acts like she is the boss of the situation, showing no fear of the law. Tinsley continues to pace back and forth on the sidewalk, looking down at the officers as if they are bothering her. She repeats over and over that she understands the law better than they do. Every time an officer tries to get a word in, she cuts them off with another comment about her rights. She seems to believe that because she lives in a fancy neighborhood and has a lot of money, the normal rules for a police investigation do not apply to her. She tells the officers that Silas is just trying to cause trouble because he is unhappy about the divorce. She demands to know why they are even listening to him. Her attitude is very defiant, and she keeps her arms crossed or points her finger to show she is in charge. She tells the police that they should leave immediately and that they are making a big mistake by questioning her. The officers remain calm, but Tinsley only gets more annoyed. She acts like the police are the ones doing something wrong by simply showing up to answer a 911 call. The narrator explains the background of the situation to give the audience more context. On October 5th, a man named Silas Vance called 911 because he was in a very dangerous situation. He told the emergency operator that his ex-wife, Tinsley, was currently attacking him and destroying their expensive home. The narrator points out that although the couple is officially divorced as of June, a judge ruled that they both have to live in the same house until the following summer. This court order has created a pressure cooker environment where small arguments quickly turn into big fights. Silas claims that Tinsley started out trashing the place and throwing heavy objects directly at him, which caused him to bleed and suffer a serious injury. As the police arrive, the narrator warns that while Tinsley is acting like a victim on the sidewalk, the physical evidence inside the house might tell a much darker story about what really happened. The officers follow Silas's instructions and step inside the house to see the damage for themselves. As soon as they walk through the door, they see that Tinsley was not just exaggerating. The expensive home is in total disarray. There are broken pieces of glass scattered across the floor and furniture has been moved or knocked over. The narrator notes that the house looks like a war zone, which matches Silas's claim that Tinsley was trashing the place. One officer stays near the door to keep an eye on Tinsley, while the other walks deeper into the home to find the husband. They find Silas, and the sight is shocking. He is bleeding from multiple cuts, and there is blood in different parts of the room. The mess in the house makes it clear that a very violent struggle took place. The officers begin taking pictures of the broken items and the blood to use as evidence, realizing that this is much more than just a loud argument. Outside on the sidewalk, Tinsley tries to tell the officers her side of the story. She repeats that she is the one who is actually in danger. She tells the police that Silas is obsessed and has been acting like a stupid person ever since the divorce was final. Tinsley claims that today was the breaking point. She tells the officers that Silas cornered her and said, "I'm going to kill you." She acts very scared as she repeats his words, trying to make the police believe that Silas is a violent man who finally snapped. She says that everything she did was just to protect herself from his threats. When the officers ask why she didn't call for help first, she says she was too busy trying to survive. She speaks very fast and uses her hands a lot, hoping that if she talks enough, the police will stop looking at the broken glass inside and start looking at Silas as the bad guy. She insists that she is the real victim and that Silas is just a crazy ex-husband who wants to see her in trouble. When the officers ask about the blood found inside the house, Tinsley has a very strange explanation ready. She admits that she was the one who threw the items, but she insists she never hit Silas with them. Instead, she claims she only threw things at the floor. She tells the officers that Silas is only bleeding because he was walking on the glass that she broke earlier. The narrator points out how unlikely this sounds, especially since Silas has deep cuts that look like they came from being hit, not just from stepping on something. Tinsley acts like this is a perfectly normal explanation and shrugs her shoulders as if the injuries are Silas's own fault for being clumsy. She keeps trying to downplay the violence, telling the police that Silas is exaggerating his pain just to get her in trouble. She seems to believe that if she calls it an accident, the police will stop investigating the domestic battery. While Tinsley is talking, the police notice another person standing nearby. They discover that Tinsley's sister is also at the house. The officers realize she might have seen what actually happened during the fight. Tinsley immediately tries to stop the police from talking to her. She says her sister is just visiting and was not there when the argument started. She tells the officers that whatever is happening is between me and him and that they should leave her sister alone. However, the officers explain that she is an adult and a witness, so they have to speak with her. They decide to separate the two women so Tinsley cannot tell her sister what to say. Tinsley gets very upset about this and keeps trying to shout over to her sister, but the lead officer steps in her way. The police suspect that Tinsley is hiding something, and they want to hear the truth from someone who isn't trying to protect themselves. Because Tinsley keeps shouting and trying to tell her sister what to say, Officer Molinado has to take control of the situation. He turns to Tinsley and gives her a very clear and firm warning. "I need you to come over here and talk to me," he says, pointing to a spot away from the other people. When Tinsley tries to argue and says she is not moving, the officer's tone becomes even more serious. He tells her, "Don't make me put you in handcuffs." He explains that they are investigating a potential crime and she is interfering with their work. Tinsley acts shocked that a police officer would speak to her that way, but she finally stops shouting at her sister for a moment. This is the first time Tinsley realizes that the police are not going to let her run the show. The narrator notes that her rant is not working anymore, and the officers are getting closer to finding out what really happened inside the house. As the officer talks to Tinsley, he notices that she seems a bit clumsy and her breath smells like a party. He calmly asks her if she has been drinking any alcohol today. Tinsley does not try to hide it. She admits right away that she has had some beer. When the officer asks how many, she acts like it is not a big deal and just shrugs it off. However, the narrator explains that this admission changes everything for the police. In a domestic battery investigation, if someone is under the influence of alcohol, it makes their story much less reliable. It also explains why Tinsley might have lost her temper so easily and started throwing things at Silas. The officer realizes that Tinsley's rant might just be the alcohol talking, and he becomes even more focused on finding out the sober truth from the husband inside. Inside the house, the other officers find Silas Vance sitting on the couch while being treated by medical staff. He looks exhausted and is bleeding from several cuts on his arms and legs. Silas tells the officers that the fight started over a small disagreement that Tinsley turned into a violent attack. He explains that she began screaming insults at him before she started trashing their place and throwing heavy decor directly at his head. Silas says he tried to move away, but Tinsley kept coming at him, throwing glass items that shattered everywhere. He tells the police that he never threatened her and that he was only trying to protect his face from the objects she was throwing. The officers look at his injuries and realize they don't look like accidental cuts from walking on glass, they look like he was hit with force. Silas's calm and steady voice makes his story much more believable to the officers than Tinsley's loud shouting outside. As the officers gather more evidence, the tension outside reaches a boiling point. Officer Molinado returns to Tinsley and asks her to move to a specific area so they can finish their work. Tinsley immediately becomes defensive and refuses to take even a single step. She looks at the officer with a defiant face and shouts that she is not going anywhere because she has done nothing wrong. When the officer tries to explain that she is interfering with a criminal investigation, she cuts him off and challenges his authority. She tells him that he has no right to tell her where to stand in her own yard. The officer remains calm but firm, warning her that her refusal to cooperate is only making the situation worse. Tinsley's attitude shows she believes she is above the law, and she continues to argue every word the officer says. The narrator notes that this is the biggest moment of tension yet, as Tinsley's entitlement turns into a direct battle with the police. The lead officer, Officer Molinado, stops the argument and looks Tinsley directly in the eyes. He explains that this is no longer just a loud disagreement between ex-partners. He tells her clearly that they are investigating a potential domestic battery that occurred inside the home. He points out that Silas has physical injuries that the police cannot ignore. Tinsley tries to laugh it off and says it's all a big misunderstanding, but the officer doesn't smile back. He tells her that under the law, if someone is injured during a fight, the person who caused it has to be held responsible. For the first time, the word crime is used, and the mood on the lawn becomes very heavy. Tinsley stops smiling as she realizes that her wealth and her fancy house might not be enough to keep her out of serious trouble today. Despite the officer's serious tone, Tinsley doubles down on her entitled behavior. She looks around her expensive neighborhood and tells the officers that this entire situation is not normal. She argues that because of her social status and the neighborhood they are in, the police should not be treating her like a common suspect. She acts as if the rules of a standard investigation are beneath her and that the police are making a massive scene over nothing. She even tries to shame the officers, suggesting they are wasting their time by investigating her instead of focusing on real criminals. The narrator notes that this is a classic Karen move, trying to use privilege to escape the consequences of her own actions. However, the officers don't budge, they remain focused on the facts and the injured man inside, regardless of how much money Tinsley claims to have. The officers gather on the front lawn to compare what they have found. They discuss the deep cuts on Silas's arms and the fact that he is currently being treated in an ambulance. One officer notes that the injuries are too severe to be caused by simply walking on glass as Tinsley claimed. They also look at the photos of the house in total disarray. After talking to the supervisor, the lead officer makes a final decision. Because Silas has clear physical injuries and Tinsley admitted to throwing the items that caused the mess, there is enough evidence for an arrest. The narrator explains that the police have a policy for domestic battery. When there is an injured person and a clear aggressor, they must take action to keep everyone safe. Tinsley watches them from a distance, still acting like she is untouchable, but the officers are already reaching for their handcuffs. Officer Molinado walks slowly toward Tinsley with a serious look on his face. He tells her, "All right. Can you stand up? You're under arrest." Tinsley's eyes go wide, and for a second, she stops talking. The shock of the moment finally hits her. As the officer tells her to put her hands behind her back, she begins to pull away and shout, "What do you mean?" "For what?" The officer calmly explains that she is being taken to the station for domestic battery because of the injuries Silas has. Tinsley starts to shake her head and says, "Are you kidding me? I did not do anything." Even as the metal handcuffs click around her wrists, she tries to argue that she just got there and that the police are making a huge mistake. She looks around at her expensive yard, realizing that her wealth and status did not stop the law from doing its job. As the officers lead Tinsley toward the patrol car, her shock turns into pure rage. She begins to scream at the top of her lungs, telling Officer Molinado that he is making the biggest mistake of his life. "I am going to sue every single one of you," she yells, her voice echoing through the quiet, wealthy neighborhood. She demands to know the officer's name and badge number, promising that her expensive lawyers will have his job by the morning. She continues to insult the police, claiming they just showed up and didn't check any of the facts before putting her in handcuffs. Even as she is being lowered into the back seat of the cruiser, she refuses to stop talking, telling the officers that what they're doing is not legal. The narrator notes that while Tinsley is busy making threats, the neighbors have all come out of their houses to watch the dramatic downfall of the woman who thought she was above the law. The narrator returns to give a final update on the situation. Tinsley Vance was taken to the police station, where she was officially charged with domestic battery. Despite all her shouting about her rights and her threats to sue the officers, the physical evidence of the trashed home and the injuries to Silas were enough to keep her in custody. The narrator notes that while Tinsley thought her wealth made her untouchable, the law in America applies to everyone when violence is involved. As for Silas, he was treated at the hospital for his cuts and released later that same day. For the first time in months, he was able to return to his home without the fear of another attack or having to deal with Tinsley's entitled attitude. The video ends by showing that no amount of money can protect someone once the police bodycam reveals the truth.